Hello, educators. Melissa Lambert here. And we've been working with educators lately around this topic of student engagement, particularly student engagement in the remote setting. And this is the first of three modules around student engagements where we start to really look at defining engagement. And what does that mean? So think about a time when you were working with a group of students. It could be a lesson or a unit when they were totally engaged. What was happening during that time? What was your role as a teacher? What were students doing? And what did it feel like? If it felt like you were losing track of time and things were just happening and the learning was really just driving the experience, it may be that you went beyond student engagement and entered into student empowerment. And that's where students are really agents and have agency in their own learning. So we put together three modules. This is the first of three, where we start to think about how do we get to that place and what are the components or what's the thinking behind student empowerment. So in this first of three, in all three of these, we really highly recommend that you work with a partner teacher or your professional learning community. And that's for a couple of different reasons. When you do this work in tandem with others, it really becomes more powerful. And you have a chance to ping ideas off of one another and agree on evidence to collect, compare that evidence, and then think about how you're going to adjust instruction, right? So we'll start with that and then see what kind of changes we can do to support. Each of these modules have the video, a reading resource, and you can take up in the right-hand corner a snap that is right off of the screen. That's your reading resource. And so you'll want to think about going through the video and the reading, and then we offer a try this, some kind of instructional move or strategy, and the opportunity to collect some evidence. So let's look at this work here. This has been adapted from Designing for Voice and Agency. Right there at the core of these concentric circles, you see empowerment and ownership, right? And that really starts with student voice. So students, especially multilingual and English learners, need to have a sense of voice where they are really have an opportunity to share their unique perspectives. Multilingual learners come to the school setting having so many rich and amazing experiences to share. And so developing that voice and the opportunity to share their perspectives, their diverse perspectives, is really important. And it's important because once students feel empowered to take ownership of their learning, it has that level of ability and chance and time and opportunity to communicate their learning. And that is a big part of the core of agency, student agency. And what we want for our students is to be able for them to advocate for themselves and others, and particularly as they impact the broader community in which we all live. So that voice builds to agency, agency and voice together really have that core of empowerment and ownership. So we start to think now about how do we create that and how do we start to release some of that responsibility to students with support and with encouragement to help frame this next phase. Fostering Quality Schools did a lot of work with the long distance call survey, and what we found particularly about how learning is going in the remote instruction is that there's a lot of validation to be had. A lot of work has gone into the social and emotional well-being of students, as well as making sure that students have technology devices and that they can navigate and negotiate those devices. So what we have also found, a trend, if you will, is that student engagement has been somewhat low in the remote setting, and yet teachers are working harder than ever. So what does that mean for learning? What does that mean for teaching? And what can we do differently? So let's take a look at learning as being on a continuum, right? Engagement on a continuum. So on the left-hand side, you have active disengagement, and that's sometimes so active, they're not even showing up. Then in the center of this continuum, you see passive, right? And so that could be that students are coming and participating, they're paying attention, but there just isn't that feel of engagement, right? You're not losing track of time. On the right-hand side, you see the engaged side or the active engagement side of the continuum. And that's where students are driving the learning. They're really setting their own goals. They're participating in self and peer assessment. They know where they are in their learning, and they are invested and engaged, and they're seeking feedback to help drive the learning in the community within the classroom. So let's narrow that scope a little bit and think about this term student agency. How do we get to that place, right? On one side, we have compliance. And what we know about compliance is that it might work in the moment, but that kind of learning doesn't stick. In fact, compliance erodes student agency over time, right? That's where students become dependent on the teacher. And when you get to the center, you see engagement, and that's great. But, engagement also implies that it's the teacher's sole responsibility, as if you have some sort of switch or magic wand, or you're going to do something so fabulous, everybody cannot wait to be engaged, right? That's really, that is a start, and it's important. But let's look at empowerment. And empowerment is really where we get into that whole notion of reciprocity, right? Where those amazing lessons that you're designing and those units to elicit and inspire agency happen because students feel a sense of ownership, that they have an invested part of that, and that they are initiating the learning. So part of this too is, at what point do you release some of that responsibility and set it up in the structures so that you have the opportunity to experience some of these things. So let's dig in a little bit around student agency and think about where that work comes from, and then offer a couple of ways of doing things that would help you invest in that student empowerment. So there's no universally accepted student agency definition, but there's some major common elements. So let's take a look at what those elements are. We know that student agency includes students who are setting their own goals. They are doing a lot of deep reflection because they know where they're going. And if they don't know where they're going, they know what and how to ask and who. And so there's a fourth dimension that's really coming up around this piece, and that's this notion of self-efficacy. And if a student believes that they can act with agency, really determines whether or not they are going to be successful with that. So students' beliefs about themselves, we know, follow teachers' beliefs. So if we can get those beliefs in check, we're really going to be inspiring that self-efficacy. Some factors that impede this are those biases and microaggressions that arise. And one of the important points that we make in this paper and also throughout all of the 3 modules is to really think about those in the remote setting, in the hybrid. We know with hybrid, there's a lot of transitions, right? So a lot can be lost in between those. So we just want to make sure that transitions are really tight, and that during remote learning, it's so hard to read the room. Some of the sarcasm or the jokes that may not be ill-intended can come off as microaggressions. And what we know about biases and microaggressions is that they're additive. So over time, they can actually equate to a large catastrophic trauma. And as much work as we have done in the field around social and emotional learning right now, these still exist, right? We don't have, just because we're online, it doesn't mean it's socially neutral. There's a lot of emphasis that goes into making sure and checking in when you see any emotional effects, cognitive effects, or behavioral effects that you take those seriously, and that we don't just lump student disengagement as being lazy or apathetic, right? There could be some compounding factors that are really adding to this. So it's just a note to be aware of and to take seriously. We know that at the core of all of this, we need to find ways to help students become more self-directed, right? Self-directed learners are self-starters. They manage their time and their materials. You may have been seeing a lot of this already. So how do we help learners to identify when they're doing this? And then also how we can transfer that back into eventually when we go back in person, but also where they're doing this in their lives already, where they're managing, and how we can make the crossover to help understand that these are skills, these are life skills that will help with academics, and they'll also help with learning in general. So don't assume that students have learned these things. We'll have to be explicit. And that's where this first module really lands. Like, what's the first starting place, and how do we get students, especially the most disengaged, to really feel a part and some ownership? And I'll just share a brief story about my own experience. I had a high school class early in my career where students had all of the elements of disengaged, right? And we just thought, where could you possibly start? First, we asked them. We sat down, my partner teacher and I sat down, and we worked with students, and we said, what is going on? And they felt that they didn't belong. So we did what we knew best at the time. And I'm telling you, it totally transformed the classroom, and then the grade level, and then eventually the school. So we started classroom jobs. And everybody had some sort of responsibility. And that was hard for me because as a teacher, I really was a little bit of a control freak. And so I wanted to have control over everything, the academics, the atmosphere, the who answered what question when. And I had to let go of that. I had to share and be able to open that space so that students felt, because what I realized I was doing is shutting them out. And what the part that's so much like what we're going through right now is that a lot of the folks that we work with have a lot of control. They want everything to be so perfect for their students in the remote setting that they're doing everything. Our teachers are doing everything. And at what point can we release some of that responsibility and push that over to the students? And how do we do that in a way that's going to help them feel connected and help them feel that there's some sort of academic, or that they're learning some language and learning some skills within that? You've probably done this a lot. This is the Four Corners activity. So we've put together a virtual Four Corners for you, where you have some quotes to put up in the four corners around the virtual room, and that could be Jamboard or whatever app you're using that would be appropriate for this. And we gave you a series of quotes, very inspiring quotes by inspiring people. And what your job as a teacher is to step back and just listen to what is happening in the discussions that are taking place. So each of the students pick a quote. They go with that. They break out into a room, or you can do it in one space and have students talk about it all together, depending on how many you have in a room. And then you reflect. So collect evidence. What are students saying? What are they? What's happening that they're resonating with that particular quote? You can learn a tremendous amount, right? So take that, and we've done this with teachers, and then develop your job descriptions. In fact, some of the teachers we worked with developed job descriptions that you had to apply for, and really establish some clear success criteria about those. And definitely each of the components have a reflective piece as well. But they're not just any jobs, right? We're not clapping erasers. We're not picking up all kinds of materials and sorting them. It's not that kind of job. Look at some of these jobs that these teachers have put together. Class podcaster, class DJ. So they went and looked and analyzed podcasts and said, what are the components of a successful podcast? How do you keep people engaged, right? Class DJ, what's appropriate for a class DJ if you're bringing it to your school environment, right? And all kinds of success criteria there. These are rotating jobs. So everybody gets to do one of these. They pick their top 3 and everybody gets a job, but you see where you're starting to release some of this responsibility. And then, of course, the graphic design artist who takes student work and puts it into posters, the team trainer who stops partway through a lesson to do workouts and collects that data for the class. IT, we know we have students out there who know a lot more about technology than we do. So how are you capitalizing on that? And thinking about that academic reporter, right? The student who wants to report out on how the class is doing, they do investigative articles, all these kinds of things. Again, clear success criteria so everybody knows what success looks like. Additionally, there's the class motivational speaker. So all kinds of ways to think about jobs, to really circle and cycle back to that level of belonging. And that will be the start to developing voice and developing agency. So here are some ideas about collecting evidence. Always, always, always include deep levels of reflection. What are you doing well? What do you want to do differently? And then collect that information, talk about it with your colleagues, see if things shift and change. And of course, if there are ever any questions, you can always find us at Fostering Quality Schools. Thank you so much. The next time we see you, we will be talking about who's doing the talking and exploring academic discourse to increase student agency. Thank you.